Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning if you're on the West Coast, and thank you for joining us today for what we think will be a very exciting and informative webinar. Today, we'll be talking about a topic that is becoming increasingly important to foundations all over the United States, creating jobs, and more specifically, creating jobs by helping to foster an ecosystem where entrepreneurs can thrive and build the kinds of high-growth ventures that are creating the vast majority of net new employment in this country. My name is Caroline Tate, and I'm a senior partner at JumpStart. And joining me today will be Laura Bennett, entrepreneur, co-founder, and CEO of Embrace Pet Insurance. We'd like to thank the Chronicle of Philanthropy for hosting today's webinar. And before we begin, I'd like to remind you of a few housekeeping items. You may submit a question at any time during the live presentation by typing in the Q&A box on your console. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible in the last few minutes, time permitting. Please feel free to download a copy of the event slides by clicking the green Resource List button at the bottom of your console. And finally, this event is being recorded, and the archive will be available on demand starting tomorrow at the same URL. So that's it. Thanks, and let's get started. So thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us today on the topic of creating jobs through entrepreneurship. Let me first just start by giving you a little bit more background on myself and our guest speaker. I'm Caroline Tate. My background is in business. I studied business at Wharton and got an MBA from Case Western Reserve. I spent 14 years with McKinsey & Company as a business consultant. And today I'm a senior partner at JumpStart. JumpStart is a 501c3 organization. We're a not-for-profit. We've been around for 10 years. And our mission is to help communities realize their entrepreneurial potential. And so I'm very excited to have the chance to talk with you about entrepreneurship today. And in just a few minutes, we'll be joined by Laura Bennett, our guest speaker. Laura is co-founder and CEO of Embrace Pet Insurance. She is the first pet insurance actuary in the United States, and she's a founder and leader of the Burning River Coffee Community. She is a CFA, an MBA, a mathematician, and I hear she's also the owner of 2 cats. We're very happy to have Laura joining us today. There's 3 topics that I'd like to cover during our time together. The first is the importance of entrepreneurship and why foundations like yours should be thinking about entrepreneurship. The second is to tell you a little bit about what it takes for a community to be supportive of entrepreneurship, and a little bit about why it's hard. And finally, I want to leave you with some tactical tips and solutions on how your foundation can make an impact in entrepreneurship. To begin with, I'd like to start by sharing a couple of basic concepts to provide the context for this conversation. And the first is the definition of entrepreneurship. So entrepreneurship is the process of starting and managing a startup or a scale-up business. A startup, most of you are probably familiar with. This is when an individual has a concept for an idea and wants to grow that idea by developing a prototype and ultimately being prepared to share that prototype with their clients and build a customer base. A scale-up business is an organization that is a little bit more mature, already has a business plan, typically has revenues and staff and customers, and is facing some sort of bottleneck to growth and is trying to think about how to scale. Successful entrepreneurs, in our experience, operate within the context of an entrepreneurial ecosystem. And an ecosystem is made up of many things, including the assets that a community brings to bear, the relationships among the members of the community, and services, all designed to support the growth of businesses. So entrepreneurship is at the core of what we do at JumpStart. And just before we begin, I want to give you a little bit more context about our organization. JumpStart was created 10 years ago when our civic, community, and philanthropic leaders in Northeast Ohio, where we're based, took a look at our community and saw that our community was not as supportive of entrepreneurship as we'd like. And those leaders made several recommendations, one of which was the creation of JumpStart. Our initial core and only mission was to directly support entrepreneurs in Northeast Ohio in a variety of ways. That included the provision of capital through debt and equity capital, provision of advice through entrepreneurs in residence and mentorship, and talent, as well as providing access to others by providing networking opportunities. And over time, our mission has expanded. In addition to our core work in Northeast Ohio, JumpStart is now the leader of a formal network of 16 different service organizations in Northeast Ohio, all of whom are working to support entrepreneurship and the creation of jobs. We are supporting that network in many ways, including by being the backbone behind the network, by providing shared services such as technology and marketing. And finally, we have also worked outside of Northeast Ohio, helping communities around the country realize their entrepreneurial potential. And we've served over 20 communities to date. JumpStart has done all of this work in partnership with foundations and the community leaders who are interested in creating jobs and increasing equity in their communities. So a little bit about why entrepreneurship is the right tool to create jobs. I'll be spending more time on this as our webinar unfolds. But to start with, I wanted to share this chart from the Kaufman Foundation. Kaufman looked at historical data and asked the question, what kinds of organizations are driving the net job growth in the United States? And the chart, as you can see, is showing that it's young firms, both startups and scale-ups, those that are less than 5 years old, that are driving the vast majority of those net jobs. And what I really love about this chart is that it's very consistent. This is showing over 20 years of data, and it's those young firms that have consistently driven that growth. Even, by the way, when you look at the span of time during the Great Recession and other important periods in our history. So I'm going to turn now and invite our guest speaker, Laura Bennett, to join the conversation. Just again, Laura is the co-founder and CEO of Embrace Pet Insurance. She's offered to spend a few minutes with us today to tell her story as an entrepreneur of how she's gone about building her business and creating jobs, and doing so in the context of the entrepreneurial ecosystem here in Northeast Ohio. So Laura, welcome.
Thanks very much, Caroline. It's great to be here.
Great, thank you. Thank you. So Laura, I'd like to begin by asking you if you could please describe your business and tell us when you started it.
Yes, well, Embrace Pet Insurance. We design and sell and administer pet health insurance policies for cats and dogs, veterinary care. But basically, it's peace of mind against high vet bills that you might face as a pet owner. Mm-hmm. And we started in, May 2003. We actually sold our first policy in October of 2006.
Great. Okay, thanks. So Laura, what did you have at your disposal when you started your business?
Well, not much, really, to be honest. We had an idea. We had just won a business plan competition and put plan together for that. But we also had confidence because we've won that business plan competition. But really, it was just two people: Alex, my business partner, and I. And we had no relatives in the United States. Alex is from Australia, and I'm from the UK and Canada. So after we graduated from Wharton, Alex actually stayed in Philadelphia where we were, and I moved to Cleveland to follow my husband for his job. And I was pregnant. We had one car in our family, which John took to work, so I didn't even have a car to do what I needed to do when we moved to Cleveland. So, we didn't start with very much.
Sounds like it. And now with 2020 hindsight and your experience looking back, what would you say you were really needing in those early days?
Well, first of all, it's actually, especially when you move to a new city, you need other entrepreneurs to share the highs and the lows with and to get the lay of the land. Entrepreneurship can be very lonely. I mean, even with a good support network around you. So finding your fellow entrepreneurs that can relate is very important. We really needed three things as well, which was capital, some money to get started. We needed an insurance company partner, in particular for us. And we also needed on the people side of things, such as mentors and a talent pool to build our team to make Embrace happen. And to get all these things, we basically needed the connections and a network to access those potential customers, employees, and of course the capital providers. Very important.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Okay. So it sounds like you had an idea, you had a concept, you had a business partner. Yet you described there are a number of really significant elements that were missing in those early days. So what was your next step?
Well, at first I thought it would be easier to find the insurance company partner versus the money. But in fact, we found the capital and access to the entrepreneurial ecosystem through JumpStart first, which basically helped us then get the insurance partner. But we were one of JumpStart's very first portfolio companies receiving funding from the JumpStart's Evergreen Fund.
Mm-hmm. Right. Can you tell me more about JumpStart and the ecosystem and share a little bit about the connections and the opportunities that were made available to you through that system?
Yes, well, as the quote says, without JumpStart there would be no Embrace. So JumpStart really, in particular, and the ecosystem in broader, really helped us find money, which was initially through a direct infusion of capital from JumpStart. We also were able to build some legitimacy. We were really two people with a business plan, but we were able to partner with Lloyd's of London as our insurance partner because of JumpStart. And JumpStart also helped us find the right people, like hiring, advice on hiring, but also giving us a network. And then following on, JumpStart really helped us access venture capital network. So they've been helping us. And actually as well, JumpStart really talked about us endlessly, as well as the other portfolio companies at the time. And so we got a lot of media and PR just from their efforts of talking about us.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay. So thanks for sharing those reasons of how the ecosystem helped you. There are quite a few examples that you included there. Can you pick one and tell us how JumpStart helped you? And maybe let's use the Lloyd's of London example. How did that play out?
Yes, well, at the time we had no offices. I mean, we were basically operating out of my house. And so when we needed Lloyd's came to visit us. Of course, they had to do their due diligence. So when we needed a place to host them, we used the space at JumpStart. But not only that, all the senior members of JumpStart attended the couple of days of meetings that we had with Lloyd's, and that really demonstrated that it was Northeast Ohio supporting us, not just two people with a business plan. So the ecosystem really helped us in that respect. But we also had direct support as well. When we had to go back to visit with Lloyd's and negotiate a contract with them, I actually took with me Mark Smith, who was our entrepreneur in residence at JumpStart, because my business partner Alex couldn't come with me. And so Mark was there to really help with the contract negotiations, but it turned out I was pregnant again at that time. And so all the usual things that you do when you're networking with Lloyd's, which is things like smoking cigars and drinking over dinner and things, I couldn't do most of that. So I had Mark to help me with that. But he was very instrumental in guiding me and advising me on how to handle contract negotiations with Lloyd's. which really made a huge difference to our company as a whole.
That's great. So Laura, can you tell us, to what extent has your business expanded since you begun, and where are you located today?
Yeah, we are still in Northeast Ohio, and since starting in selling policies in October 2006, we actually have a total of 66 employees in 66 employees altogether, and 10 of those are outside of Northeast Ohio, so 56 in Northeast Ohio, and we insure over 50,000 pets.
That's great. So, Laura, you've given us several examples today of how JumpStart and the ecosystem has been of help to you and to your organization, Embrace. Can you say a little bit about how that investment went on to benefit the broader community as well?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer in giving back, and JumpStart and in Northeast Ohio have done a lot for Embrace. And so it was Ray Leach who's the CEO of JumpStart, who inspired the Burning River Coffee community, which I founded, by encouraging me and other entrepreneurs to actually step up and help sustain the ecosystem, so being very fully proactive within the ecosystem. So I started Burning River because I remembered back to when I first was looking for capital, first coming into Northeast Ohio, and I couldn't find one other woman who had raised venture capital funding. And it was actually hard to find men who had, but couldn't find any other women. And I really thought that would be something that I could offer, because I felt that I would have really benefited from that at an earlier stage in my capital raising. And so I decided to actually found a mentoring organization for women with high growth companies who are looking for support as they grow their businesses. And so it's really one of the ways which I contribute to the ecosystem here in Northeast Ohio.
So, Laura, last question. I'm a foundation who's thinking about supporting entrepreneurship in my community. What advice would you have for either me or the service providers in my organization that I might collaborate with or fund? What advice would you have for me about how to go about that?
Right. Well, as you mentioned earlier, there's sort of two roles that JumpStart does, which is the direct and indirect support. And so in the direct support, really investing in organizations that really are focused on job creation and entrepreneurship, key part of the whole equation. And in that investment, encouraging everybody to think this is a long-term investment. Entrepreneurship really does take time. It took us since 2006, so far it's taken us 9 years to get to where we are now. So long-term view. And then finally, find a way to enable the network of organizations and capital, so supporting others to come in and be part of the ecosystem so that the whole community can really have a big impact. So it's that direct and indirect support, both very, very important, in my opinion.
That's great. Well, Laura, thank you very much for taking the time to share your story and your insights on what it takes for an entrepreneur to go about the hard work of building a business and creating jobs. Really appreciate that. And I just want to remind everyone that Laura will stay on the line with us through the end. So if you have questions for either Laura or myself, Caroline, please do submit them in the Q&A box on your console. So there are at least 4 different reasons about why I think you should care about entrepreneurship as a tool for driving job creation. The 4 are the fact that entrepreneurs are the ones that are creating the jobs in our country. Second, foundations are a natural leader for job creation. We also know that investing in entrepreneurship works. And finally, investing in entrepreneurship really can be a self-sustaining process. So I'd like to talk a little bit about each one of these 4 points. The first point you've actually already heard quite a bit about, hopefully through the data from the Kaufman Foundation at a national level and Laura's story on building the Embrace Pet Insurance Company. you've heard a little bit about how the fact that entrepreneurship does create jobs. One other data point I'd like to share with you is that it's actually women who are growing the fastest in terms of entrepreneurial growth. And this chart, made by the American Express Corporation, looked at 3 different dimensions: the number of firms, employment, and revenues. And across all of these dimensions, it's actually the women-owned firms that are outpacing their male counterparts. And so I share this with you to encourage you that as you think about the entrepreneurship strategy in your community, please do think about it in an inclusive way of all entrepreneurs, including the fantastic women leaders like Laura in your community. Foundations are also a natural leader for job creation. And there are 3 different reasons why I say that. The first is that your foundation is probably a long-standing organization in your community. You've probably been around for a long time and play the role of being both a trusted and a neutral leader in your community. And those attributes help you play the role of bringing together multiple different stakeholders in your community: anchor institutions like corporations, chambers of commerce, workforce investment boards, county and city leaders, incubators, economic development organizations. There is a host of different organizations that all play a very important role in the topic of entrepreneurship and job creation. And you as a foundation are uniquely positioned to convene that group together. The second is your ability to influence. So you can use both your status as a trusted and often neutral player in your community, but combine it with the fact that you have access to capital. And bringing those 2 pieces together can influence the stakeholders in your community and help shape the programs and the outcomes that you know your community needs. And the third way is through leadership. So you have a unique opportunity, given your status as a neutral convener and the fact that you can bring capital to the conversation. You have a unique opportunity to take risks. And risks are what a community needs to support entrepreneurship, and especially in the early days. One of the most impactful risks I've seen community foundations and place-based foundations take has been the establishment of shared metrics. So establishing a set of goals that an entire community that cares about job creation can rally around, and having a foundation help hold those organizations accountable for working towards those goals has been a very impactful role for a foundation. We know that investing in entrepreneurship works. So we know it at a national level. At a regional level, it has worked here in Northeast Ohio. So in Northeast Ohio, JumpStart and our network of 16 different service provider organizations have helped almost 1,000 entrepreneurs in our 10 years of existence. Those entrepreneurs have gone on to raise almost $2 billion worth of capital, but they've also created 4,000 direct jobs. And that number, the job creation number, actually almost doubles when you think about the indirect jobs that are created as a result of those new businesses, jobs in suppliers and other supporting industry, as well as the induced jobs, which are jobs that can be created as a result of the income generated by that new market. Those 1,000 entrepreneurs have also generated almost $1 billion of revenue. And all of this has been possible in part by the generous grants and contributions from foundations, which our community has received $22 million worth over the years. In addition to the regional level, it also works at a state level. So here in Ohio, we are very fortunate to have a program called the Ohio Third Frontier Program. The Ohio Third Frontier was created to help Ohio fulfill its aspiration to be a world-class, technology-driven economy. It was created 10 years ago with a vision to be a $1.6 billion investment, and over time has invested in about 30 different programs across our state. Those programs covered many different topics, including technology commercialization, research, and entrepreneurship. But two of them were entrepreneurship-focused, the Entrepreneurial Signature Program and the Pre-Seed Capital Program. Those two programs, which are still in existence, represent 20% of the funding across the entire state, yet have gone on to create 70% of the total direct jobs that were created and retained as a result of the program. So yet another data point on how investing in entrepreneurship works. And finally, we know that there are ways for investment in entrepreneurship to be self-sustaining. Here are two examples. The first is that you can create a program-related investment. A PRI is a low-interest loan, which can be used to fund the operations required to help achieve long-term impact. There are many examples of how to apply PRIs. One, which is happening here in Northeast Ohio, is to support the operations of scale-ups, of organizations helping to support scale-ups. So if you remember, scale-ups are those businesses that are a little bit more mature than a startup, have an established business plan, but are trying to figure out how to unlock some sort of bottleneck for growth. PRI dollars can be used to fund the operations to unlock that growth, whether it is through the provision of advice or research, sharing insights, or providing hands-on support to the scale-up entrepreneur. And then over time, as the scale-up entrepreneur succeeds, those loan dollars are repaid back to the foundation. A second example is an evergreen investment fund. Here at JumpStart, we have an evergreen fund. It is a self-sustaining nonprofit fund that was started 10 years ago, created in part with philanthropic donations that provided the capital to invest in new businesses. That capital, in our case, has been used to support 76 different deals, and those entrepreneurs have gone on to create 900 direct jobs. And as those businesses have grown, with their success, with that success has come back returns that feed back into the fund and help fund sustainable growth. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time now talking about what it takes for a community to support entrepreneurship. It's actually a pretty complex business that requires a number of different moving parts. I'd like to say a little bit about each of those parts. So the first is talent. We need talented individuals like Laura Bennett to go about creating the startups and the scale-ups in a community. So the second is those entrepreneurs need risk capital. Risk capital is the funding required to fuel the initial growth of the business, to build that first prototype, to give you the opportunity to really understand your market and your customers. That early stage risk capital is often provided by angel investors, seed funds, and other entities. Entrepreneurs and the communities in which they thrive also need advocates. They need folks at the Chamber of Commerce, at trade associations, in government, and in other places to create a policy and environment that is supportive of entrepreneurs. That policy can do things like create favorable tax policy, favorable wage policy, and help build and invest in the infrastructure that businesses need to operate in, among many other examples. Communities also need stories, and this is one of my favorite examples in this diagram. Stories and their storytellers are a reinforcing mechanism. When you have great examples like Laura Bennett's creation of the Embrace pet insurance company, you tell that story to others, and it drives others to have the confidence to take the same kind of risks that she took. And it ultimately contributes to a culture of entrepreneurship and a stronger brand for your community. And all of that is a self-reinforcing mechanism which only spurs on even more growth. Communities also need growth capital and services. So organizations like law firms and corporations, foundations, government institutions, and others provide funding as well as time and their talent to be supportive of creating a marketplace that supports growth for entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs need services. So organizations like JumpStart provide advice, provide mentoring, we provide networking opportunities, and we provide access to that peer group. If you remember, Laura mentioned being an entrepreneur can be lonely. And so the service providers are often helping bring all of those, access to all of those services to entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs need ideas and new sources of innovation, which come from places like centers of research and other centers of excellence innovation. And of course, they need the training and the skills to become the entrepreneurs that they are meant to become. And so we need education from universities and other educational institutions to nurture and develop that talent. And that brings us back full circle to the importance of talent. So hopefully you can see that it really does take an ecosystem of many different actors and roles to be supportive of entrepreneurs like Laura. But doing this work is hard. There are many reasons why it's hard, but I wanted to illustrate 3 examples for you here today. The first is that I wanted to share is the notion that entrepreneurs require capital themselves to grow. And 35% of small businesses, according to the Small Business Administration in 2013, were unable to access that capital. And we know that entrepreneurs need that capital in order to fund job growth. You can see on the following slide that the National Small Business Administration did an analysis to show that there is a strong correlation between capital and jobs. And so, for example, helping to provide capital through the creation of a pre-seed fund is one example of a way to address that challenge. The second challenge that I wanted to share is the economic development organizations themselves are also facing a funding crisis. The International Economic Development Council, IEDC, surveyed 250 different economic development organizations in 2012 and asked them questions about their funding environment. And what they found was that the EDOs, the Economic Development Organizations, shared that there are 3 major sources of funding: the federal funding, state funding, and private funding. And that what was happening over time is that the federal and state dollars are largely decreasing or remaining stagnant, while the private sources are largely increasing over time. And in fact, that red arrow shows you that almost 40% of the economic development agencies said that it's foundation grants that are increasing their funding over time. So this creates a great opportunity for you as a foundation to play your part in stepping up and help fill this funding gap that service organizations are facing. And then finally, on the topic of collaboration. So the Stanford Social Innovation Review did a report that talked about the importance of collaboration. And they pointed out that nearly 1.4 million nonprofits are trying to develop independent solutions to our world's hardest problems. But they typically do it in a way that is siloed and sometimes even at odds with each other. So this presents complication because being effective at this work really does require strong collaboration. It requires taking a long-term view. And it often requires having access to shared metrics and shared goals. It also requires knowledge of what trade-offs to make. What kinds of programs are the most impactful? And where should the leaders in a community be making their impact decisions? And so ultimately, we believe strongly that communities, in order to address this challenge, need to be able to rally together around a single strategy for growth. They need to include stakeholders from across the community. They need to have a strong fact base in order to know which initiatives are going to be the most impactful, which will build upon the strengths of that community. And they need to have mechanisms to hold the community accountable for that success. Now, finally, I'd like to share 3 different ways that your foundation can make an impact when it comes to using entrepreneurship to create jobs. First, there's 3 different roles that you and your foundation can play. The first is that you can be a funder. So your organization can take on the role of funding the programs and the initiatives and the tools that are required to support the hard work of entrepreneurship. The second role that you can play is that of a convener. So as I mentioned previously, you can use your status as a trusted and neutral leader in your community to help bring together the civic business and the philanthropic leaders that are required to work together to build a strong entrepreneurial foundation. And the third example role that you can play is to be an implementer. This is probably the most hands-on role. It was one of the key roles here in Northeast Ohio, for example, when one of our community foundations helped play a role in the creation of JumpStart. So your organization can create new ventures, you can create new organizations, you can create new programming, such as contests and other initiatives to support the community in developing entrepreneurship. No matter which role you take, I would encourage you to certainly take one of them. And no matter what role you play, your community always needs to have followed the 3 steps of driving entrepreneurship that we lay out here. The first one is to assess your community. You need to understand the strengths upon which your community is built and the strengths upon which your entrepreneurs will be able to have a foundation for their business growth. That requires interviewing organizations in your community, doing the primary and the secondary research to build up that fact base. And through that work, identifying the gaps in your community and the work that needs to be done to fill those gaps. And finally, pulling all of that together into real-world recommendations for how your community can help accelerate the growth of entrepreneurship and job creation. The second way that you and your community, the second step that you and your community need to take to support entrepreneurship is by implementing the programming that you've identified through your assessment process. So you need to develop a plan for how you're going to take the actionable steps to implement that strategy and to work with the collaborative organizations in your community to execute against that and to put that plan into action. And the third step that every community needs to take is to measure your impact. So having a regular view of the milestones that a community hopes to achieve with regards to its investment in entrepreneurship, gathering that data and sharing that data back with your community is a very effective and useful step that every community should play. And so that brings us to the end of the sort of the prepared slides for the presentation. As I mentioned at the beginning, you have an opportunity to ask any questions of either Laura or I by typing in the Q&A box on your console. I know a couple of questions have come in for me already, and I'll take a look in a moment to see if any questions have come in for Laura as well. But as I go through the process of doing that, let me go ahead and get started with some of the questions that I already see here. So the first question that I see is, what are the benefits to the foundation if we do this work? So if your foundation is interested in getting involved or continuing or strengthening or expanding your work in entrepreneurship, I personally see that there's lots of different benefits that you'll be able to realize as a result of that. The first is that it can help your reputation and position in your community. So every one of the 20 communities we've seen in JumpStart, including our Northeast Ohio experience, has been interested in trying to create jobs. And so for you as a foundation to step up and play an instrumental role in this work would mean that you're doing a great service for your community and ultimately will benefit your own reputation and position. I think another great benefit of doing this work for foundations is that it can help you build and extend and strengthen your own networks. So entrepreneurship is a great reason to connect with many of the civic and business and community philanthropic leaders in your community. And so it's yet another reason to reach out to those organizations. So those are a couple of examples. I think the second question, let me see here. Another question that I see is, what is the work required from the foundation to support entrepreneurship? Okay, so that's a really, really good question. So the first thing that I'd say to that one is that this work is all about driving the collective impact, right? So this is for you as a foundation to work with the other organizations in your community to drive collective impact. And that work can look a little bit differently based on the kind of role that you want to take on. If you are choosing to be a convener, that work is often helping identify the key organizations that are playing that critical role of driving impact in your community. It can also mean that you're not only identifying them, but also sort of making introductions and facilitating connections and helping them connect to one another through different formats to have and engage in that dialogue around how to drive entrepreneurship. If you choose to be an implementer and create new programming, that's a much more hands-on work that would require finding time and effort from a staff member or another individual to help you see that project through from beginning to end. And if you choose to play the role of funder, then the work required is, around understanding what potential initiatives that could be funded, what that array of opportunities looks like, and prioritizing them and choosing which investments will make the most sense for you and your foundation. And then ultimately defining the milestones that you need to watch over time to know whether or not that initiative is successful, and to help nurture it over time. So that was a really great question. I think a third question that I see is, it says, what are some of the main challenges that I see foundations facing when investing in entrepreneurship? Yeah, so JumpStart has worked in over 20 communities. We've helped those community leaders overcome some really major obstacles and challenges to driving entrepreneurship. I think a couple of the challenges that I've seen the most often is, well, one is around culture, and I guess just some of the challenges that that might come up as a result of the preconceived sort of notions and thoughts from other individual stakeholders, whether they're from boards or from investment communities. The community leaders or even staff folks all kind of have their own view of what success might look like. And so this is why we at JumpStart really stress the importance of building alignment among all of these many stakeholders, taking the time up front to understand all of those perspectives, to document them, to understand them, and to then work on the collective impact initiatives together as a collaborative effort. And we find that work, if you make that investment of time up front, it really goes a long way to helping all of those stakeholders, boards and investment committee members and others understand the strategy and understand sort of the investments that your organization is making. I think another challenge, quite frankly, that some foundations have faced is around the topic of just pure capacity. How much time and resources do they and their staff have to dedicate to this? And that's a real challenge in many cases, but we believe strongly that taking the time to invest in building an entrepreneurship strategy and thinking about how to leverage all of the resources, all of the skills, and all of the talent around you is one of the best investments of time you can make. And but it also sometimes helps to have an extra partner on the ground. And then I'm just seeing, I think there's one more other question here. Let's see here. Have you calculated your economic contribution to the various communities that we serve? So, and if so, how do we do that? Yes, so the topic of gathering the metrics and the data is a really, really important topic. And yes, we do both calculate the impact both here in our hometown in Northeast Ohio, as well as in the many communities that we have partnered with. So how do we do that? Well, the first way is to sort of identify up front the outcomes and the metrics that matter to you and your community, and ultimately the funders that are funding the work in your community. Once you've identified what those metrics are, you need to have the data systems in place to gather the data to collect those metrics. And in some cases that involves surveying the entrepreneurs and the other stakeholders supporting them, the service providers and others, to collect that data. It certainly requires having technology, systems and components to be able to house that data, which in some cases includes having a CRM system. Here in Northeast Ohio, we have one single CRM, a client relationship management tool that all 16 of our providers use. And they're on a regular basis providing the data into those systems regarding the nature of the entrepreneurs that are walking in the door and sort of require services, to tracking the programs that are in place to support those entrepreneurs, to tracking the outcomes and the results of those entrepreneurs as well. And then it can also include tools to help communicate those metrics back to the community. So there are a number of fantastic examples that I've seen and that we've contributed to as well, where a foundation has taken on the role of sharing publicly available data about the impact and the effect of the entrepreneurial work in their community. And that's a great tool to engage the community in the dialogue, as well as to keep everyone apprised of the progress, but finally also to hold the leaders of the community accountable for the work that they do. And so with that question, I think we're going to end today's session. I'd like to thank Laura Bennett for sharing her experience and her fantastic story around building the Embrace Pet Insurance business. I'd like to thank the Chronicle of Philanthropy. And I also want to thank you, our listeners, for listening, and encourage you to consider, if you have begun to think a little bit differently about your role in your community, or if you have already decided your role in entrepreneurship and job creation in your community, but aren't quite sure how to engage or move forward, or maybe you simply have questions about how what you've heard today, please do feel free to contact us at JumpStart via the phone or email or the web. We would love to be a thought partner with you to help you as you go about that journey. We look forward to continuing the conversation with you. Oh, and one more thing, a reminder that the recording of the event will be available starting tomorrow at the same URL. Thank you very much and have a good day.